Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025, and our friend Scott Ritter is back with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, and I apologize to your audience for being late. But as I explained to Nima, there wasn't much I could do about this.
Yeah, yeah, I really understand that. Scott, let's get started with what has happened in Russia. And we cannot downplay what has happened by any measure because it was a very serious attack on a very serious and important and strategic uh, military target in Russia, which was the nuclear bombers. And we know that they keep these bombers out and visible on the surface to monitor that from all these nuclear superpowers are monitoring themselves. What's your take? What's your understanding on what has happened with the attack on Russia? It wasn't just on the nuclear bombers, it was on two bridges in Bryansk and in the Kursk region. They're, as we talked, they're attacking the Crimean bridge as well. Go ahead.
Well, let's talk about a couple things first. First of all, um, let's talk about Russia's nuclear doctrine because this is the scary part of this conversation. Russia's nuclear doctrine, as modified in 2024, sets certain red lines. And one of the red lines is an attack by conventional forces against Russia's strategic nuclear um, forces of bombers, missiles, command and control, etc. Just simply using conventional forces to target Russia's strategic nuclear infrastructure is a red line that can trigger a nuclear retaliation. The second is when a non-nuclear power is supported in a conventional attack against Russia that threatens its existential existence by nuclear partners, then Russia will view that as an attack by the nuclear partners on Russia and use nuclear weapons as well. Um, and so the Ukrainian Operation Spiderweb, this drone attack, and on four Russian strategic bomber bases, violates at least two, probably more, of the red lines of Russia's nuclear doctrine. I mean, we're playing with fire here because with different leadership, people that didn't have the spine of Putin, people who didn't have the foresight or the patience or the resilience of Putin, we'd probably all be dead now. That's how serious this is. We're talking about global nuclear exchange, the total annihilation of the world. So this isn't a joke. This is as real as it gets. And it gets even more real when you realize that Ukraine couldn't have done this without the assistance of either Great Britain, the United States, or both. The likelihood is that it is the British who took the lead on the planning and execution of this operation. This has all sorts of British fingerprints on it. But, you know, the United States, up until Trump's recent election, the United States was heavily involved in training Ukrainian special operators and intelligence service members in guerrilla warfare, unconventional warfare, covert direct action, all the things that are happening here. And I think it's very possible that there's rogue elements within the CIA's paramilitary and international operations divisions who have maintained connectivity with their Ukrainian counterparts, either directly or indirectly using the British as a cutout, but that there's American fingerprints on this attack. Even if Donald Trump didn't order it, even if Donald Trump wasn't aware of it, the fact that Russia House in the CIA's operations directorate, was involved is problematic for world peace. The British are just, I think, are emerging as some of the worst people in the world. They don't care about international peace and security. These are very petty people who, Americans need to stop viewing the British as, our fellow Democrats. The Great Britain is a terrorist nation because what Ukraine has done over the course of the past several days aren't acts of war. These are acts of terrorism. Terrorism. That's it. And I'll get to that in a second. But the British are literally putting the survival of the world at risk because of their petty differences with Vladimir Putin and Russia. And America should control this instantly, but we're not. That's a sign of American weakness there. The good news is when the Russians take a look at what's happening, they look at the big picture. The big picture is they're winning this war decisively. I mean, there isn't a single front in which they're losing. Everything the Ukrainians did, from blowing up 2 trains to attacking, carrying out these drone attacks, to their attack on the Crimea bridge today, are terrorist operations. That's it. That's all Ukraine can do right now, is basically cheap tricks. Go out and carry out some fancy covert operation. Looks good on paper. Did it impact the direction of the war? Ask the Ukrainian soldiers on the front line. And the answer is no. They're getting slaughtered. They're getting pushed back. They're losing territory. They have no reserves. They have no ammunition. They're running out of everything. Ask the Ukrainian negotiators at Istanbul, because everything the Ukrainians have been doing is designed to disrupt these negotiations. The goal and objective of Ukraine was to get Russia to pull out of the negotiations or carry out a massive retaliation on such a scope and scale that Ukraine said, we can't possibly be expected to negotiate with these animals. Look what they've done. Russia didn't do any of that. Didn't do anything. Russia sent their negotiation team. It sat down with the Ukrainians for an hour and a half. They exchanged a memorandum, agreed to return 6,000 bodies and other prisoner swaps, and put their markers on the table. And the Ukrainians now don't know what to do. Neither does the West, because these talks were supposed to end. Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal flew to Kiev and conspired with Ukraine to set this up, to have the package of sanctions there waiting, so when Russia fumbled at the negotiations, they could come in and get Trump to put the hammer down. But now Trump's been handed something. What does he do? He can't say the Russians aren't cooperating. He can't say the Russians aren't playing the game. So he has to continue this process, and it's impossible to continue the process with Lindsey Graham's sanctions going forward. So the Russians have played this brilliantly. This is genius, diplomatic genius, operational genius on the part of the Russians. Yes, we can say this is an intelligence failure. I mean, every time you have an action of this sort take place, it's an intelligence failure. But I would also say the people that say that don't know a goddamn thing about intelligence. I'm just going to be honest with you. Because if you think you could have stopped this attack, I say you couldn't have. It would have required luck. The FSB, the Russian Internal Security Forces, are arresting dozens of Ukrainian operatives every day throughout Russia. Pro hint, Russia's a very big country, by the way. Pretty damn big. And so, the FSB is out there doing what the FSB does to round these things up, to round these people up. And they have prevented a whole bunch of attacks like this. But when you have the Ukrainians who are trained in operational art by the CIA, by MI6, who are falling in on, I believe, the operational resources of the British, you're falling on networks, support networks, the ability to move money. The British and the Americans have perfected over the years the art of moving resources inside Russia. They use a variety of cutouts, means we can move money here, there. We can get money to people. We can stash things. We can buy things in Russia, stash them, and it's all done under the radar. So, if you think, yeah, I could have stopped that, I'd say the hell you can. This is very difficult to do. Watch how quickly Russia unravels this and exposes this. They'll do it very quickly because they're very good. But to operate under the nose like this. Who here could have predicted it? On whose bingo card were the Ukrainians building 4 truck-based, drone motherships? How many people saw that one coming? I mean, I spent a lot of time, running options through my mind. I didn't get that one. No one did. It's innovative. This is a sneaky British concept. And it worked. We don't know how the drones got in there. There's talk about the drones being shipped in, but you can buy drones in Russia too. There's a whole industry where people from all over Russia are buying drones, Chinese-made drones, and then sending them to the front. Driving up and giving them to the units. This is because drone warfare has developed so quickly that the Russian government was lagging behind in the provision of these small suicide drones. This whole FPV drone, first-person view drone, suicide kamikaze drone, this is made at the front. This whole tactic is invented at the front by Russian soldiers, not imposed on them from above. These are Russian soldiers saying, we have to do this to survive, to live. And it's such an effective tactic. It's redefined the entire war that the government has fallen into place and now has drone units, has procurement. They're sending the drones in. But even then, the adaptations that are taking place are done by the soldiers. And there are many units that fall outside of the framework of the Ministry of Defense procurement network, these volunteer units, units belonging, they're still affiliated with the Donetsk People's Republic or Lugansk People's Republic, the Akhmat Special Forces. These units still require civilian pipelines to bring in these drones because you're using drones, hundreds of drones every day, hundreds of drones every single day. And so these drones have to come in, which means there's a supply line. You go out and you procure them. Well, if you've got that much procurement taking place and it's free flowing in, 100, what would they say? 117 drones were used in this operation. You can accumulate those purchases over the course of a year and a half in a way that's not detected by the FSB. I mean, you have to give the people who planned this credit. It was innovative, and it largely successful. I mean, 50% of the attack force didn't participate. One truck apparently caught on fire, and the other truck was captured, or its contents were largely shot down. The 2 bases that were attacked, one I think was attacked more effectively than the other. But when you look at what they wanted to have happen right off the bat, 50% of it didn't work. And of the remaining 50% that did engage, only a small percentage of that actually made it to it. So a lot of effort to go into something that seized headlines, but had zero operational impact on the Russians, zero diplomatic impact. All it did is harden the resolve of the Russian government to see this through. Dmitry Medvedev, who normally in circumstances like this puts out posts that are very explosive and and as such they lend themselves to being dismissed by people saying, well, this is just good cop, bad cop kind of stuff. But I read everything he says and I listen to what other people say too. And he put out a post that was quite telling. He said, that which needs to be destroyed will be destroyed. And those people that need to be eliminated will be eliminated. It's inevitable and it's going to happen. Meaning the Russians aren't going to be taken off course here. The Ukrainian terrorist tactics, what did Ukraine think they were going to accomplish blowing up 2 bridges? One of those bridges, by the way, is blown up using American-provided C4 plastic explosive. Now, the Russians, I guess one of the bombs didn't go off and they were able to take it, reverse engineer it. And then when they tested the C4, it's American C4. Now, we've provided it with the Ukrainians. It doesn't mean that we actually did this, but what it means is this. Someplace in Ukraine, the CIA's Special Activities Division sat down with Ukrainian special operators and taught them how to make a C4-based explosive designed to bring down a rail bridge. We taught them to do that. They're using our explosives, our design. We trained them on this. We trained them how to infiltrate into Russia. We trained them on the various tactics, the communications necessary, etc. So even if Trump said, stand down, too late, we already trained them. And they executed that which we trained them to do. But what did they do? They blew up bridges. The trains are working right now. They didn't stop the trains. They killed a bunch of civilians. They wounded a bunch of civilians. They just certified in the minds of the Russians that Ukraine is a terrorist nation. Take a look at the peace proposal that Russia put out there. I don't know if people, actually went through it and paid attention to it. One of the conditions for conflict termination is elections in Ukraine, parliamentary and presidential. Zelensky's not going to be the president of Ukraine, and the current parliament's not going to be the parliament of Ukraine. That just isn't going to happen. They will all be arrested. Trust me. And they will all be brought to justice. Trust me. They've built their own grave. Now they're building their own coffin. They might as well climb in the coffin and, find an automatic hammer to put the nails in it, because it's over for them. Ukraine will not emerge from this well. Russia's winning on all fronts. The Ukrainians are just going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. Russia is going to get stronger and stronger. And if they keep doing this, at some point in time, once Russia realizes that they can demonstrably prove that Ukraine has no intention of pursuing peace, and its Western bosses have no intention of allowing Ukraine to pursue peace, then Russia can drop all pretense and say we're at war with Ukraine. But Russia's not doing that right now. The smartest person at the table is Vladimir Putin. He's 400 times smarter than Donald Trump. He's orders of magnitude smarter than anybody in Europe. And, Zelensky doesn't even rate being a piece of dog poop on Vladimir Putin's shoe. That's how low this man is. Putin is in control. Absolutely. You see no panic in Russia right now. Yes, on the blogosphere, there's all sorts of, oh, the sky is falling. Oh, Russia's weak. Oh, Putin's weak. Oh, this, that, and the other thing. I just say, look at the battlefield. That's the ultimate, canvas. And the painting that's being painted on the battlefield is a painting of Russian victory, decisive. And what we saw over the course of the past few days, and even up to including this morning, are desperate acts carried out by desperate people who have no other recourse. The best Ukraine could do is glorified acts of terrorism. That's it. They can't do anything else than that. They've got nothing else. And Europe can't support them. Europe's crumbling. Look at the Dutch. Right-wing government came in. Oh, we're going to support it. They're done, finished, gone. Not because of Ukraine necessarily, but because of bad policy. And one by one, these European nations are going to fall. Poland right now, they have a new president. Tusk is now going to, I guess, put up a vote of no confidence or vote of confidence to see if he still has the confidence. But Poland is questionable. Ukraine won a slim election. Not Ukraine. Romania won a slim election. But it's not as though that the vast majority of the Romanian people support these continued policies. France is going to be in political trouble this summer. Macron's government may fall. Starmer, there's movement to push him out. Germany, Merz is in, but is he really in? How long until he too goes through a political crisis? The only one that's sitting in rock solid position is Vladimir Putin. And so that's how I spend it. It's a very dangerous situation, but thank God we have Vladimir Putin as the Russian president, because he's not going to let this spin out of control, no matter how much the incompetence and deliberate provocations of the other parties are pushing it to become something that's totally out of control.
And that's why many people are arguing that they're just criticizing Donald Trump, the way that he's handling the war in Ukraine. And I talked with Carl Wilkerson. He was so much upset with what is happening right now, the incapability of the administration in doing something substantial. Here is what General Flynn said, Scott, about what has happened in Russia.
Was happening for the billions and billions and billions of taxpayer dollars that we give to the United States intelligence community, particularly the CIA, and the billions of dollars that we've been given to tens of billions we've been given to Ukraine, for us to not know that this was ongoing, that this planning was ongoing, that this attack was going to occur against nuclear capable bombers. Okay. These aren't just some aircraft that are parked that are going to conduct close air support against, frontier targets in the eastern part of the Donbasses of Ukraine. These are nuclear capable bombers. So for us to not know that, for us, our intelligence to not know that, so I don't believe for a second that our intelligence didn't know, not for a second. I do believe that our intelligence community and system and people in it didn't brief Donald Trump, which is really, really dangerous. And it tells you if the president of the United States is now saying, I don't know, I did not know about this, and he clearly didn't know about the assassination attempt that occurred last week. He said it during one of these hasty press conferences that came about during when he departed, I think, Marine One. I mean, he said, I'm not aware. I mean, these are huge issues. If I was Trump, if I was sitting in that situation room right now with the director of the CIA, the director of national intelligence, the Secretary of Defense, and maybe the director of National Security Agency, some of the other key people, Secretary of State, I would want to know, because I would find out. I would tell the FBI, I want an investigation going on right now as to who knew what and when did they know it about this particular attack. And I would tell Pan Bondi, I want a special counsel right now to determine exactly what occurred here. Why wasn't I brought up to speed on these kinds of issues? And I don't want it like 6 months or 4 years from now. I want it in the next week. Okay.
Yeah. People are so much concerned, as you saw with General Flynn and Colonel Wilkerson, you as well.
Yeah, but let me just push back a little bit on General Flynn. I wish I could talk to him, because I'd say, General Flynn, when you were in Iraq and you were doing the whole JSOC fusion thing with McChrystal, did you know everything the CIA was doing? It's a rhetorical question, General, because you didn't. Because you wore a uniform and you weren't in the little CIA bubble, the paramilitary bubble. There were things the CIA was doing in Iraq that you had no clue of. And to be honest, the director of the CIA had no clue of. You want to know why? You know this, General. I mean, this is what gets me about it, because this is very disingenuous. Once the CIA receives direction to do something, it's hands off. And until there's explicitly ordered to cease and desist, don't spend another dime, withdraw all personnel, drop everything. And even then, the CIA doesn't obey its orders, because once they get going, it becomes a sense. Read the founding instructions about CIA's Special Activities Division. They called it something different back then, but back in 1947 or whenever the CIA was created, the Special Activities Staff was created for deniable covert operations to achieve regime change and all this. And it meant that they could lie to the U.S. government to achieve this because it's deniable. Hey guys, when you create Frankenstein, why are you upset when Frankenstein does what Frankenstein does? The CIA should be disbanded, eliminated. And frankly speaking, 9/10 of their case officers should be investigated and put in jail because they're gangsters. They're criminals. And they can't be trusted. They're not good Americans. They're actually the worst kind of Americans, because they believe they operate above the law, that the Constitution doesn't apply to them, because they've been given a mandate to lie, to cheat, to steal. Literally, that's what they do for a living. I remember, I was recruited by the CIA's paramilitary people. And, the guy who talked to me, Mick Flynn, that's not his name. It's one of the many aliases that he used, but he was a covert operator that went back, started out as a Green Beret in Vietnam, then switched over to SOG, got involved in the CIA's murder programs, and then went on, and he was pushing Iran-Contra, and he was, going into Honduras and setting up bases, working with the Contras. He did all that. He got involved in doing some other stupid stuff, and then in the lead up to the Gulf War, he set up the CIA special activities people did a program in Iraq before Desert Storm, where they had these Iraqi operatives in place in case an American pilot got shot down. And the operative's job was sort of to replicate what happened in World War II to create safe houses so these pilots could be brought in and then move from safe house to safe house, safe house, till the CIA could get them out. He set that program up and he monitored it from within Syria. After the war, he got involved in regime change operations in Iraq, initially lying to everybody, including me. But, ultimately, everybody knew what they were up to. But he basically interviewed me, and the interview was going well until he said, you're going to have to learn to lie. I said, well, I understand deniability. He said, no, you're going to have to learn to lie about everything, everything, and to everybody. And he said, we don't think you can do that. And I said, I think you're right. I mean, and that was sort of the end of that process. I mean, he didn't condemn me for it, but he's just like, you can't be a Boy Scout. You can't be, an honest person here. You're getting into a game where everything's a lie. Everything is a lie. Everything. And I'm like, well, gosh, I don't know if I want to play that game anymore. But that's the CIA. That's the reality of it. These people were ordered. I just want to remind people, you're General Flynn and everybody's outraged. Larry Wilkerson's, everybody's outraged that they attacked nuclear bombers. You do know it's not the first time they did this. You know that CIA trained unconventional warfare teams penetrated Russia and made it to the outskirts of Ingalls base, where the nuclear bombers are, where all the bombers come before they bomb Ukraine. When they're put on, the conventional stuff, and launched their attack against Ingalls airbase, which again triggered the whole thing. That attack is one of the things that caused the Russians to change their doctrine, because that attack could only have taken place, and did take place, with the assistance of the CIA and the British. That's it. The President of the United States ordered that attack. Did Donald Trump rescind that order? No. The official policy of the United States under Biden was to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia. Has Donald Trump rescinded that order? No. So stop blaming the CIA. They're only doing what they're supposed to do. And they're going to lie about it. It's the president. He sucks. He's the worst leader in the world. And frankly speaking, it's the DNI. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, I love her to death. I respect her. Why isn't she putting that in front of the president? Mr. President, you have to rescind this order, rescind this order, rescind. Call on the CIA director, Ratcliffe, and say, I need Russia House assembled before me right now with all their documents, and have Kash Patel put the FBI behind them with handcuffs ready. And I say, I want everything on the table. Every single operation you're doing with Ukraine in Russia, everything you're doing in Russia on the table right now for review, because we're looking for consistency of policy. We have a president who says he wants to pursue peace, and you're in there blowing up goddamn airplanes. Stop. Do you not understand that what you're doing is undermine the president? They know damn well what they're doing is undermine the president, because they want to undermine the president, because they don't want peace with Russia. The CIA is a threat to the national security of the United States, because they do whatever the hell they want to do. But remember, at some point, they were ordered to do it. And they've been ordered to do things in Russia. Standing orders. I can guarantee you, if I walked into Moscow station and shut it down and opened up the safe and you'd see some weird stuff, man. You'd see some weird ass stuff, and you'd be going, why are we doing this if we're pursuing peace? Because the CIA has standing orders to do this stuff. It's intelligence, man. Well, we've got to do things. No, we don't. We don't have to do things. The best intelligence, and I'll say this as somebody who did this for a long time, the best intelligence I've ever got is the intelligence I get by cooperating with people, by working together, because you get the accurate intelligence. When you have to go against a hostile target, you're coming in with the indirect approach. You very rarely get the whole picture. And because you've come in from different angles and using cutouts who are not necessarily the most honest people in the world, the information you receive is tainted. It may not be accurate. It could be fed back to you. I remember the Iraqi Amir Rashid, Minister of Oil, but he ran the WMD programs. At one point in time, mocked me because I was kicking his ass. I set up my own intelligence collection program, and I had Iraqi defectors that were giving me good information and going at it. And he said, "Okay, so you're pretty clever, Mr. Ritter, but what if just to bother you, set up my own counter, intelligence program, and I set things up and I started feeding you information just to see how it gets to you and to see how you respond, so that when you come on your inspection team and you inspect this one site in a certain way, I go, aha, I own you now. I'm in your head. I'm directing your operations." And then he went and did it. And there was a period of time where we were carrying out inspections that were literally being directed by the Iraqi government because they took control of the intelligence flow. And it was a bad period of time. In my defense, it happened after I left and before I came back. They seized control. Once I got back, I was able to purge that out and get back into where we were in control. But there was a period of time where the Iraqis actually took control of the flow of intelligence, and because they knew that we had exhausted all the other sources and we were desperate for information. And so they just started creating opportunities. Do you not think the Russians are doing that? Because again, this is stuff people have to understand. It's all relevant to this conversation. In the 1990s, the British and the Americans recruited everybody in Russia. Everybody. Because everybody in Russia wanted to be recruited. Hell, go take a look at all the KGB people that came over, wrote their memoirs, Matrokin brought in all his archives and all this stuff, and they're just sitting there spilling their guts on everybody but Vladimir Putin and a handful of the Sloviki who stayed there and said, no, we're true Russians to the core. But everybody was bought. Everybody was bought. And, understand that we don't just buy the bit, we recruit. You remember Christopher Steele? You heard that name, right?
Yeah.
The dossier boy. He made his reputation just running around in the 1990s, recruiting everybody. Coffee boy. Hey, want to work for MI6? Shoeshine boy. Want to work for MI6? Prostitute. Hey, how about 5 of you work for us? Pimps. We'll take you. Everybody. And they just keep them on the books. And so the society is just totally, totally infiltrated with these resources. Now, the Russians come in and they're not stupid. The Russians are very good. Yeah, you'll get away with something. You carry out an operation. The Russians arrest somebody, they reverse engineer it, do their money thing, and now they have a picture. They don't come out and say, this is everything we know. They go, okay, just let this one run a little bit, monitor this guy, control this guy, start feeding this back in here. We have to arrest and try this guy because there has to be seen that we're doing something. But then what the Russians do is they reverse engineered that entire spider web. So the British and the Americans think they have all these resources inside, and the Russians have flipped them all and are controlling them all, and they're feeding the information back. That's why we suck. Because even the CIA with all their secret super duper crap, they're getting bad information. They don't know a damn. The biggest example of this, probably the most famous one that most Americans aren't aware of. Do you remember when Barack Obama kicked out of Russian diplomats in 2016, right after the election, say, oh, these are bad diplomats, and they did this and they did that, and they're interfering and all this kind of stuff. You know how this happened? This happened because the FBI and the CIA tried to flip a Russian diplomat in the United States who had a drinking problem. Now, I just want everybody to understand what I just said. A Russian diplomat who had a drinking problem. Do you think the Russians would have a diplomat in the United States who had a drinking problem? You understand that the drinking problem is the big red flag, that they use that because that leads to marital difficulties, that leads to monetary problems. Read the book Spy Who Came In From the Cold and see how the British Smiley flips the main character so that he punches a grocer, gets drunk, goes to jail, gets his reputation ruined, just so that he looks like he's a prime candidate for recruitment, and he goes in there. Meanwhile, he's a controlled resource the whole time. This guy was a controlled resource the whole time, and yet we recruited him. And then we kept him in place. At that time, the ambassador to the United States' name was Ushakov. You might know him, Yuri Ushakov. He's the senior foreign policy advisor to the president of Russia today. Well, Ushakov went back, and this guy followed him and got promoted in place with Ushakov. And he goes and he gets up until now he's inside the presidential administration. The CIA's boy. Meanwhile, in the CIA, there's people like me going, nah, we ain't buying it. Hey guys, we need to pull them out, do the polygraph. We need to stop doing it, stop feeding those reports in. This is bad juju. All the red flags are going up. We can't trust any of this stuff because it's too good to be true. But Brennan, director of the CIA at the time, no, stop. We got a resource inside the presidential administration. So what Brennan did is when Russia House refused to run this guy because he's so obviously a double agent, Brennan took him into the executive and ran him himself. Brennan went and briefed the Gang of Eight. Brennan went and briefed the president, briefed him on all this stuff, got the United States to overreact, to go after Donald Trump, to accuse Donald Trump of things that Donald Trump didn't do. It was all made up. And the Russians are just sitting there going, what do you think? What do you think Obama wants to hear today? Give it to him. What do you think? Do you think the Senate, what would happen if we gave them this information? Give it to them. And they're just feeding it. And they, oh no, they almost brought America down. You remember the summer of 2016, Donald Trump being accused of being a Russian guy, Hillary Clinton, the FBI line. The Russians are sitting back there going, ain't this beautiful? We didn't have to do anything, and America's just blowing itself up. That's because Brennan violated everything. And finally what happened is this guy, here's the proof of it. They do all this stuff. Obama overreacts. And what do the Russians do? They retire him. Now, if he was really the CIA's boy, they'd have shot him. See, he was really a drunk. They didn't want to have this guy to begin with. He was not a good Foreign Service officer, but they kept him in, said, we'll keep you alive. We'll give you your pension. We'll give you all this stuff, but you have to work with us from now on, because if you don't, we'll kill you, because you went and you drank the coffee with the CIA. You weren't allowed to do that. You were a bad boy. So either die or play it. But the Russians are people of their word. They said, okay, you're free. Meanwhile, the Americans are like, we got to get him out of there. And so they did their extrication. The guy went on vacation with his wife, I think, to Montenegro. Again, went on vacation with his wife. Doesn't happen if you're some sort of top secret, high level dude. The Russians could care less about this. In family to Montenegro. Then the CIA extricated him in a very difficult thing. Nobody was trying to stop him, but they got him out, and everything's going hunky-dory until he's now in the United States with his $1 million, because he's been paid by the CIA the whole time to be this big level asset. Then he buys a house. But because the CIA knew that this guy sucked, he bought it using his real name. And it showed up in the real estate records. And suddenly everybody knows who this guy is. And the whole thing fell apart. That's how bad the CIA is. Okay? That's how bad. The CIA sucks at everything it does with Russia. Go back and study the history of it. Their chief of station has been compromised the moment he sets foot in Russia. They try to do operations, they get nailed. The Russians have released the videotapes of these guys. They got one where some guy and his wife are walking wearing the mask disguises, like a Mission Impossible. And the mask disguised with the big bags and the big coats. And they walk in, and the girl goes to the ladies' room. Why? Because it ain't a girl. Comes out, it's a guy. And he goes off and gets in a cab and goes, and the Russians track him with all the cameras around there, see who he reports, arrests that guy. He runs, tries to get back at him. I mean, the Russians have rolled up Moscow Station like you wouldn't believe. So Moscow Station's in there doing stupid stuff. The Russians know all about it. That's why the Russians are so calm, because they know everything. They know everything. But now we come back to Michael Flynn. Flynn, the CIA did this because the president told him to do it, but the president never told him to stop doing it. That's the problem. That's the problem. We have to shut the CIA down, or more stuff is going to happen. And hopefully the president is given the wake-up call now. Hopefully the DNI works with Pam Bondi and Kash Patel to bring the CIA under control, because if they don't, Nima, I'm here to tell you, this is a rogue agency that has the capability of ending all life on the planet. And believe me, they have some alcoholic, wife-beating son of a bitches in there. They're case officers. These are the world's worst people, by the way. The life is horrible. I'm glad I didn't ever take that life. The life is horrible because you're not a good person. You look in the mirror and you realize what you've done. You're a liar. You're a murderer. You're a thief. You steal from your own government. You make agents that don't exist so you can take the money and pocket it, put it in bank accounts so you can go out and have your whores and your alcohol. You're an alcoholic, and you hate yourself. You just despise yourself, and you keep doing this horrible things because you're a horrible human being. That's most of your case officers today. These aren't good people. They're not good people, and they can't reintegrate into society because they're alcoholics, because they're wife beaters, because they're criminals. I don't know what we do with them, but it's not like give them a medal and let them come out and be good Americans. No, we put them into, private contractors where they get to be alcoholics, wife beaters, and get their South American whores. And they go off and they do bad stuff until they die of either sclerosis, they get killed, or they just go off and shoot themselves because they suck as human beings. That's the CIA. That's the reality of the CIA's operations division. They should be shut down, 100% shut down. If you're going to do this kind of operation, give it to the military, because the military at least has some honor. The military has some discipline, some structure. And the military can do almost everything. I know I've gone off on here, but Desert One, the attempted rescue mission, the CIA had their things going on. They lied to Beckwith, they lied to Delta Force, they lied to everybody about their sources. But when it came to the actual operational support, the advanced force operations, the military didn't rely on the CIA. They sent in two guys from Berlin, two special operators from a covert unit in Berlin who went under false passports because they were trained to do this. They did this kind of stuff. They went into Iran. They met with resources that they had identified. They rented a warehouse. They rented trucks. They did the whole thing. They had a network of Iranian agents working for them. This was the military that did this. We don't need the CIA. The CIA is not needed, not in the direct action paramilitary. We have Delta Force. We have SEAL Team 6. We should get rid of SEAL Team 6 because they're a bunch of murdering sex and manure. But Delta Force still has some honor. We have them. We don't need the Special Activities Division ground branch. We don't need them. We have guys that can do this. They can operate undercover, and they have discipline, and they have a chain of command, and they have honor. The CIA has no honor. They just lie. That's the problem. Mike Flynn ignored the fact that he knows that the CIA is a rogue agency. He's sitting there pretending that somehow, these guys, should be brought under control. The president gave them an order to attack Russian airfields. That president's name was Joe Biden. The new president never turned that order off. And now we're surprised that the Ukrainians attacked Russian bombers at Russian airfields. No. If you want to stop, you got to order it to be stopped, and then you got to enforce that order.
Scott, it seems that the mainstream media is somehow changing the rhetoric. When we look at Fox News, for example, the way that they're picturing the situation in Ukraine, it seems that they're getting to the same sort of strategy as the Biden administration was implementing in those days that they were running the show in Ukraine. Here is what General Jack Kane, suggested on Fox News.
Part of the peace process exhibited by the United States to leverage someone to change their behavior. We've got to do the same thing with Russia. It is part of the process. It's not outside the process. And that means we got to leverage him. And we don't know if that will actually work. Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
But we do know what is not working. And just the diplomatic talking is not working. So the leverage has got to be, I think, number one, military assistance, and give them the robust air defense systems and the other things they desperately need. Let's leverage Putin just as we did Zelensky. We don't know, let's be frank, if it's going to work, but it certainly is worth a try at this point, because diplomatic talks are not getting us there.
Yeah, we don't know if that's going to work.
We know it's not going to work. We know it's not. Let's just talk what he said. Air defense, robust air defense. Hey, Jack, we did that. You don't think that we flooded Ukraine with all the Patriot missiles, all the French missiles, the Mamba and Crotal, and the Italians sent theirs in, the NASAMS from Norway, and we gave them everything, a multi-layered defensive. It was pretty damn good. It's pretty good. There's a reason why Russia has trouble hitting a lot of these targets. There's a reason why you can move equipment into Ukraine and it makes it to the front lines, because everyone's like, why doesn't Russia interdict it? Well, guys, because it's under one of the biggest air defense umbrellas ever put together in modern history. But the Russians, it's one of the great we focus on the battlefield. Everybody's heard about Bakhmut, the meat grinder at Bakhmut. Everybody's heard about Mariupol, the bloody battle for Azovstal and all that. We've heard about the summer counteroffensive that failed at Robotyno. We've heard about all the battles of fighting in Kursk. We've heard about all the ground battles that are going on. But perhaps the most impressive campaign that's been run by the Russians is the suppression of Ukraine's air defense network, which began in the fall of 2022 and then just continued. And it was designed to exhaust the system and break it apart, to identify weaknesses, exploit those weaknesses, but most importantly, to exhaust it. There are no more Patriot missiles to send into Ukraine. We can't produce them anymore. We can't produce them in the numbers that are needed. We've given them all away. We're desperate. We're trying to get Greece to give them to them. We're running around. Israel, you've got a whole bunch of Patriots sitting in a warehouse that have been sitting in a warehouse since 1991, and we know they aren't going to work. Let's give them to the Ukrainians just so we can say, here, you have Patriot missiles. They're not going to work. Oh, we're going to upgrade them, upgrade the radars. They're not going to work because the Russians have broken the code. And the Russians have disassembled this. Today, Ukraine virtually has no air defense. And now the Russians, one of the attacks on Kiev, which used to be one of the most heavily protected points, had the new version of the Geron drones just circling. Find a target and hit it. Boom, circling. Find a target, hit it. Because the Ukrainians had no more air defense. And Key now, we're going to give them robust air. How? Think about it. The Ukrainians used to have a Soviet-provided air defense network with S-300s, S-200s, all this stuff. Not the best in the world, but had to be respected. Under that umbrella, they came in and they built the new Patriot systems with the Krotals and the Mambas and all this other stuff integrated into the old Soviet system. And then as the Soviet system fell away because they ran out of missiles and they got destroyed, this one was reinforced. So you had a shell that you built a shell inside of it. And then when the outer shell went away, that shell was still there. Today, there's no shell. So let's say Keane was magically able to go out and find resources that don't exist. How do you get them into Ukraine now, Keane? you moron. What shell is there that allows you to slip it in? Because every time you bring in a Patriot system and set it up, it's going to get hit and destroyed by the Russians. So you're not going to reconstitute this air defense shell. And since you can't reconstitute the air defense shell, now the Russians start picking apart your whole logistics things. They start hitting your warehouses. They get your warehouses at the border with Poland. They get your intermediate warehouses in Dnipropetrovsk. They get your advanced warehouses that are forward deployed in the fighting areas. And so now, Keen, you want to pour in other equipment. Well, let's say you send in 100 units of X. By the time it gets to the front line, you only got about 15 units left. And that ain't enough. And then the other thing is, I'd like to ask Mr. Keene, what's he going to do about artillery? Because we've now for the last 3 years been talking about how we're going to transform the Western defense industry, the best in the world. We are the arsenal of democracy. My God, we can produce things better than anybody, especially those damn Russians. They can't produce anything. Well, how come Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, just the other day said, sir, the Russians got their defense industry up and running, and they're producing 4 times the amount of artillery shells that all of NATO combined. When I say all of NATO, that includes the United States. All of NATO is being outproduced by Russia 4-1 in artillery shells. Tanks. Nobody's producing any tanks in the West. The French got their Leclerc rolling out, a couple here, a couple there. The Germans, I don't think they're producing Leopards anymore because they can't produce steel because the price of gas is outrageous and their furnaces don't work. The British, punching out 1 or 2 Challenger 3s. Russians, man, they're just pumping out the modified version of the T-72, the T-80, the T-90, the Armada. They got them. They're coming out. They're just there. In 2023, when I went to the Victory Day parade in Moscow, it was equipment starved because, Russia had to wake up to the fact that, they had entered a high intensity conflict phase, and it was burning through equipment, and they were struggling to meet the requirements of modern war. They're not struggling to do anything today. They are cranking out equipment. They had sufficient to spare so they could just run tanks through the streets and say, look what we got. All of their units are up to speed. They got all the equipment they need. They're building new units. Remember, the Russian army went from 900,000 to 1.5 million. That's 600,000 increase. While Europe's sitting there talking about 300,000, we're going to build 400,000. Russia already did it. 600,000. Boom, new units, trained, equipped, new tanks, new air defense, everything, while they're fighting a high-intensity conflict in Ukraine. So it's not just that Russia is resupplying the units and building new units to go down. Their 2 armies are about to be reintroduced or introduced into the fighting. They've also put a new military district outside of St. Petersburg, 70,000 strong. They're putting more units up in the Kola Peninsula. They're doing things in the Pacific and the Arctic. They're reinforcing everything. 600,000 new troops, trained, equipped. And when I say new troops, understand this. You just don't get 70,000 troops, give them uniforms, and give them equipment. They have to be prepared to execute a military, plan. Let's say the St. Petersburg people have to be prepared to, say, invade Finland and take Helsinki. That means that in addition to the tanks you have to have tanks identified to replace those tanks. And those tanks have to be in stockpiles. You have to have ammunition sufficient to take on a NATO country, anticipate reinforcement, fight a major battle. All of that has to be pre-planned and stored, which the Russians are doing. They've made some mistakes. We've noticed the Ukrainians have gotten drones into some of these big ammunition supply things, and they go boom in a big way. Why? Because there's a hell lot of ammunition there. Why? Because Russia's preparing for the big one. The Russians are prepared for the big one. Poland, all talk, no action. Poland, oh my God, if we go to war with Russia, we'll be out of artillery shells in 4 days. Well, why aren't you preparing for the big one? Because NATO can't afford it. None of the NATO nations can fight a sustained action. Great Britain, we run out of everything in 14 days, 2 weeks, everything, we're done. Meanwhile, Russia is not only fighting this high intensity conflict and not running out of anything, but they have built 600,000 more men, and they've prepared them to engage in high intensity conflict and never run out of anything. So what does Keane think he's going to do here? He really thinks he's going to get into a, because what he's talking about is a war of attrition with the Russians, who invented the concept of a war of attrition. And they invented it in a way that isn't just about, this isn't Grant versus Lee. Normally you think of a war of attrition, that's one of the analogies that's been put up there. Grant versus Lee, where, Grant comes into the wilderness and just puts his troops into the wilderness and they grind down the Union forces. But the problem is that the Union can replace all of their losses and the Confederates can't. So when the Union emerges from the wilderness, it's stronger. Despite losing massive casualties, the Confederates are weaker because they can't replace it. But even though they're better soldiers, then they go to St. Petersburg and you have Cold Harbor and more Union troops dying in a big ditch. But now the Confederates run out of troops and it's over. See, that scenario has the Russians losing men in massive human assaults. The kill ratio right now on the front line is 20-1 in favor of Russia on some days, 20-1. It ain't the Russians that are losing people. The Russians are able to replace all of their casualties and have excess. 175,000 Russians were brought into the military from the beginning of the year until today. They're going to equip 2 armies. That's 140,000, which means that there's about 35,000 combat replacements. That's not dead. That's people who are going to get mobilized out. There's people who are wounded and the dead. 35,000 between January and now. So if they've lost 35,000 in, what are we now, 5 months, but they're bringing in 30 to 40,000 a month. It's over. It's over. Keane doesn't understand what he's talking about. He lives in a fantasy world. Now, hopefully there's people in Washington, D.C. who have stopped, because what happened for a while is that the DIA and others were told that your analysis must conform with the data given to you by the Ukrainians, that it's not the policy of the United States to contradict Ukraine on issues of Russian casualties, performance of Ukrainian troops, and all that kind of stuff. So we were prohibited from doing independent assessments. Hopefully Tulsi's knocked that crap out. And now we have people who are able to give the straight, honest to God's truth about the deteriorating condition of the Ukrainian forces, the reality of NATO's inability to, mobilize forces, sustain forces, and the absolute supremacy of the Russians when it comes to, building up force, projecting force, reinforcing force, defense industry, the whole works. Keane is high. It's just stupid. The good news is the Russians don't care what Jack King thinks. That's the good news. The other good news is the Russians don't care what Donald Trump does. They prefer to have a peaceful set, but they're not going to get it. I just interviewed a guy who used to be the advisor to Ukrainian presidents, from Kuchma to Viktor Yanukovych, and advises the Russian government today. And he said something that was very glim, because I talked to him about the prospect of peace. I said, is there a chance? He said, no. He said, Ukraine is a nation on fire. And right now, because remember, there are 2 big policy objectives. At the core of the Russian demands are we have to solve the root causes of the conflict. And the root cause is NATO expansion. The root cause is the militarization of Ukraine. And the root cause is the Nazification of Ukraine. These are real problems. Right now, there's just no commonality between the Ukrainian position and Russian position on any of these issues. And yet Russia's not going to yield, which means there never will be a deal. He said, Ukraine is on fire. And basically, the Russians have decided that the best way to fight this fire is to let it burn out. Russia's not going to make any effort to put the fire out. They're just going to let it burn out. And then you solve these problems themselves. How do you demilitarize Ukraine? Kill everybody. How do you denazify Ukraine? Kill everybody. How do you ensure Ukraine is not part of NATO? Destroy Ukraine. And that's the fate of Ukraine. And there's not a damn thing Jack Keane or, Keith Kellogg or any of these other people can do to stop it. Russia's on an inevitable path towards victory. It'll take as long as it takes. Some people believe that the Ukrainians are going to burn out by the end of the summer, at least by the end of this year. But Russia said we can go as long as you want. Russia's put no. That's the amazing thing about it. Vladimir Putin's put no calendar date on this. 21 years to defeat the Swedes. We can do it. We'll do it. Russia will never quit until the victory is theirs. Trump, has another 3.5 years in office. Then he's gone. In Europe, we see politicians collapsing left and right. Nobody's going to outlast the Russians. Nobody.
You mentioned Lindsey Graham together with Blumenthal. They went to Ukraine. Here is what he said: the war in Ukraine won't end until China pays for helping Russia. He says that he's currently working with Trump's team on severe sanctions against both Russia and China. And he believes that the war won't end until China is punished for helping Russia. When I look at the way that everything is going on right now in the United States, this is everything that Donald Trump was talking about before coming to power. He didn't want any of this happening. And right now, all of them are gathering around him or just somehow trying to manage the Trump administration. Do you think that Donald Trump would go against them? Do you think that Donald Trump, is there any sort of moment coming to the mind of the president of the United States is enough is enough? I'm not going to continue this sort of insanity that you're preaching for.
For Donald Trump to do that, Donald Trump has to have some inner strength. And I would say that the jury is still out on whether or not he possesses that kind of strength. I personally believe that Donald Trump is fundamentally a coward who doesn't have what it takes to carry out these kind of domestic political confrontations. I mean, Graham and Blumenthal are the easiest ones in the world to deal with. I mean, I don't know to what extent the president greenlit any of their actions. We did hear the president say, and so Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, also said that, there's things we can do to hurt Russia, strangle their economy, etc. And I don't know if there was coordination between the Secretary of Treasury and Graham and Blumenthal to craft this Senate sanctions bill that Graham is holding out. What I do know is that Donald Trump was committed to making the Istanbul process succeed. And it appears that Graham and Blumenthal went to Ukraine to conspire with the Ukrainian government to collapse the peace deal. Now, Lindsey Graham is a senator and he can make legislation. What he can't do is negotiate on behalf of the United States of America. That's a violation of the Logan Act. And what he can't do is actively conspire with foreign parties to the detriment of American national security interests, which are singularly the purview of the chief executive, the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, not Lindsey Graham. That's sedition. So here's the question. What is President Trump going to do about this? Because if I were President Trump, Lindsey Graham and Mr. Blumenthal would be invited to the White House along with Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, and they would be charged formally with violations of the Logan Act and acts of sedition against the United States of America, stripped of their security clearances and arrested on the spot. And anybody in the Senate who conspired with them on this bill would be stripped of their security clearances as well and subjected to further investigations. The Senate cannot conspire against the national security of the United States. The president makes foreign policy. The Senate can provide advice and consent, but it cannot go out and create a shadow State Department that negotiates against this. They can pass laws. They can hold hearings. That's what they can do. They can hold hearings and bring people in, and they can sit there and say, well, shouldn't we be doing this? Shouldn't we be doing that? And then they can send a letter to the president saying it's the will of the Senate that, this is how we feel on this. And the president would do well to take the advice and consent of the Senate. But that's not what happened here. Graham and Blumenthal went in and conspired with Ukraine to deliberately undermine one of the cornerstones of Trump's vision on how to create a safer world. That's sedition. Does Trump have what it takes to charge Lindsey Graham with sedition? Because Lindsey Graham committed sedition. There's no question about that. You don't go out. Lindsey Graham has no capacity to negotiate on behalf of the United States of America. He doesn't speak for the United States of America. Lindsey Graham is a senator. He can advise and provide advice and consent to the president. He can go out and gather information from foreign governments that then lend themselves to hearings that they want to have. But he can't go out and engage in a conspiracy to undermine the foreign policy of the United States of America, which is what he did, exactly what he did. And he's calling the president out. He's basically calling the president's bluff, saying, if you don't do what I want you to do, we're going to put these sanctions. I got 80 votes. Well, the president just needs the Attorney General of the United States to do a review. Did Lindsey Graham violate the Logan Act? Did Lindsey Graham commit sedition? And then he needs Kash Patel to arrest him. I don't think the president has the courage to do that. And as a result, he's going to be undermined by Lindsey Graham and by everybody else. When you can be the biggest, baddest shark in the world, but when there's a feeding frenzy and somebody cuts you and the blood's coming out of you, the other sharks are going to eat you. Donald Trump's getting eaten right now by the other sharks. But he's not even the biggest, baddest shark. It turns out he's nothing more than a fluffy, overweight, aging, walrus. He's becoming a joke, literally. And what does Lindsey Graham think he's going to do with China? Again, first of all, it's the president of the United States gets to make Chinese policy, not Lindsey Graham. And look at the intent of the Russian sanctions. 500% tariffs on one of the things you're talking about, 500% tariffs on people who buy Russian energy products. Well, hell, China's one of the biggest purchasers of energy products there is. So if you want to have any leverage with the Chinese, you say 500%, but we can have good relations with us. But at the same time you're hitting the Russians, you start hitting the Chinese. All you do is have the Russians and Chinese say, we unplug from you, which China already did. Unplug. And then watch your economy die. You know whose economy is not going to die? Ours. Why? Well, we got guaranteed energy support from the Russians. You don't give a damn about you because you've sanctioned them every which way for Sunday. India, which many people thought was the weak link in this whole, thing for Russia, last month bought more oil in a month than they've ever bought before. India's already made its vote. India's not going to be buckled. These sanctions have no meaning because he's talking about applying these sanctions at the same time that Trump's already tried ridiculous tariffs. Trump's already taken the steam out of that. There's no impact here. What, you're going to sanction China more than what Trump already has? Trump can't follow through. That's why he had to reduce the sanctions, to put a pause on the sanctions, because the Chinese called his bluff. So it's Trump that folded. Now he pretends it's the Chinese that folded, but it's Trump that folded. China didn't start this fight. It's Trump that's hitting reverse gear. So Graham's threats are just empty threats. They aren't going to happen. That's the good news. The bad news is Graham undermines the credibility and the legitimacy of this president every day that he's allowed to continue to serve as a senator in the Senate. He has committed sedition. He's openly conspiring against this president. He's seeking to create a shadow government. That is literally the definition of the deep state. And Trump's allowing it to happen. That's why he has a Pam Bondi and a Kash Patel. Not to round up a bunch of Mexican, unregistered aliens and deport them. Not to send armies of ICE agents into the streets, but to stop this kind of crap, the deep state. Graham is the living manifestation of the deep state. And as long as he's allowed to conspire openly against the president's policies will never succeed.
Scott, 500% secondary tariffs on Russia would hit Europe as well. We know that Europe is...
Yeah, Europeans just woke up to that fact. They're like, that's us. Yep. That's how stupid Lindsey Graham is. Lindsey Graham is literally one of the dumbest men that walks the planet. He's also an evil man. just an evil man. He's the one who made common cause with Jolani and on this sort of front a long time ago. He's the guy that's been working with the Banderas in Ukraine. He's just a fundamentally evil character. There's nothing good or redeeming about him. And to the population of South Carolina, you can all go to hell and burn. You created this problem. You're an embarrassment to the definition of American citizenry because you keep putting this problem back in office. It shows how inherently corrupt South Carolina politics are. This man isn't good for America. What he does is he brings a lot of money into South Carolina, which means votes can be bought. But if you call yourself a quality citizen, if you say that, I believe in the Constitution, I believe in the fundamental goodness of America, and you keep this man as your senator, you're a hypocrite, you're a liar, you're useless. The citizens of South Carolina are some of the most despicable, disgusting Americans that walk the face of the earth because they empowered this guy and they keep putting him in office.
Scott, with the case of Iran, it doesn't seem that is much more different from what we're witnessing with the case of Ukraine. As we see the mainstream media, look at CNN, Reuters, and all of that. 1%, 3%, no enrichment. Last time Donald Trump came out and said no enrichment. What's going on, and why are they talking this way? Why do they need to go on mainstream media to argue about that? Why they're negotiating right now. And I talked earlier with Professor Miranda. He said, we don't know what's going on with Trump. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what would be the next phase of the talks with the Trump administration. Your take on what's going on with Iran?
Trump boxed himself into a corner with his policies, to where if he continued a hardline policy with Iran, the only options were military options, because conventional military force can't contain Iran's potential for retaliation. It means nuclear weapons. And Trump doesn't want to do that. Steve Witkoff has been smart enough to say the first time a nuclear weapon is used by anybody, global markets collapse. It's the end of the American economy. It's the end of the world economy. It's the end of the Trump presidency. So I don't think Trump's looking for a war. This is why you see the Israelis, again, trying to undermine the president by talking about unilateral military actions. Israel can't attack Iran in a meaningful fashion unilaterally, and they know it. They need America trying to suck America into it, and Trump doesn't want to be sucked into that war. But now you have a problem. Having bought into no enrichment, how do you deal with an Iran that says we're not giving up enrichment? You have to find a compromise. And this is what's happening with the negotiations. I think there's a deal being hammered out. It's a deal that allows Iran to produce low enriched uranium, 3.6, 3.7%, sufficient to create fuel for Boucher reactors. I think at this juncture, all Iran wants to do is save face and retain sovereignty. They've equated enrichment with sovereignty. So they're not going to yield on that, nor should they. But I think Iran's also at the point right now where they're willing to do just about anything else to create the conditions for an agreement, allow American inspectors on Iranian soil, dismantle many of their centrifuges that are currently in place, even though they said that was a red line. I think they're willing to do that because they understand there's a problem with excess enrichment capacity. One of the alternatives is to divert these centrifuges into a sort of a regional fuel bank that would produce fuel for United Arab Emirates and Iran and other nations. And this would be under the guidelines of not just the IAEA, but maybe an American entity. The Iranians appear to be willing to do just about anything short of absolute zero to achieve this deal. But that runs against the grain of domestic politics that are heavily influenced by Israel and the pro-Israeli lobby, which has taken a zero enrichment stance. Now we come back to Donald Trump. I told you he's weak. Weak. This isn't a sign of strength. The sign of strength is where you stand up and tell the Israelis, stand down, pound sand, or we drop you like a bad habit you are. Where you tell AIPAC, shut up, or I'll turn you into a foreign agent, and I'll have the FBI come in and raid every one of your offices. Okay? If you want to interfere with the national security of the United States, then you're the enemy. Free speech, you can have your meetings, your think tanks, you can do all this kind of stuff. But the moment you start conspiring against me and my policies, you're the enemy. That's what a man of strength does. And a man of strength sits down with the Iranians and says, this is going to be the hardest deal you ever cut in your life. Because in order for you to have enrichment, you're going to have to give me this. Which appears to be what he did, except he doesn't have the courage to come out and say to the Israelis, yeah, there's going to be enrichment. Iran's allowed to have it. Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty allows it, and we're not here to rewrite international law. Iran will have enrichment, but we're going to put such constraints on it that they're going to wish they didn't have enrichment or something like that. But Trump is a weak man, fundamentally weak man. He's a coward at heart. He can't do the confrontations. And so he lets the system run out. His brilliant, it's just Donald Trump being Donald Trump, playing people off against each other. Well, are you really playing people off against each other if you've unplugged and you're just letting people do whatever they want because you don't have the courage to stop them? Because that appears to be what it is. And then they tried to disguise it as, oh, he's just a brilliant master behind the scenes manipulator. No, he's a fat old man who's scared. He doesn't have the courage to come out. So he gets back into the safety of his little sanctum, and he puts out a post in all capitals because he doesn't have the courage to tell the Israelis no, or the American lobby no, or Lindsey Graham no. And so he puts this out there to buy time. Meanwhile, after he put out that tweet, he has a negotiator sitting down with the Iranians saying, yeah, you're going to have enrichment. The Iranians are going, well, who do we believe? You or the president? Who just tweeted out stupidity. Donald Trump is just an inherently weak man. He's a coward who is incapable of making the hard decision. We see that across the board. He comes out and he talks tough. Tariffs on everybody. Here's my chart. We're even going to tariff the penguins. We're going to tariff the whole world. And then when he realizes the whole bond market's collapsing, the world's dying, we received a phone call. No, you didn't. We received a phone call from China, and they're begging. They said, my God, we're falling apart. So we're going to do it. The Chinese are like, we didn't call you. I mean, he lives in a fantasy world, and he projects it, and everybody else is like, well, that didn't happen. No. You made a decision to back down because you recognized the whole system was failing. That's the reality. This is a coward. This is not a smart man. This is a government out of control, and somebody's got to bring it under control, or bad things are going to happen real soon. I mean, we're talking about potential for real economic collapse here. Real economic collapse. He's supposed to, cut spending. Doge, Elon, go baby, go. $160 billion worth of cuts. But then he has to have the big, beautiful bill, which undoes all that and just heads us down the path. $36 trillion debt, if we don't reverse the trend, is going to immediately spike to $54 billion. And then it's over. America will never recover from that. We may not recover from 36 trillion, 54 trillion, because then it's just going to start 74, 120, 30, and it's out of control. That's what this guy's doing. There's no genius behind his system. There's no system. He's just making things up as he goes along. He's a liar. A liar. He hasn't told the truth about anything. And he can't do anything. He doesn't have the courage to follow through with any of the tough decisions that have to be made. The Ukraine conflict could be solved right now, literally right now. Keane is sitting there talking about, well, we got to try to send it in. I got another idea for you, Keane. Pick up the phone and tell Zelensky it's over. No more American money. No more American weapons. And not only that, we're not going to let Europe send you anything either. We're shutting the whole thing down. Well, I talked to Mercer. Now, you see, because at the end of the day, Zelensky, we can shut down the German economy. You can't. So guess who Germany's going to respond to? Us. Great Britain, shut her down. You can't. We can. France, easiest problem in the world to solve. Shut her down. We're going to tell Europe that you're dead. You're done. You're finished. In fact, I'm sending an airplane to Poland. Why don't you get on a car and drive the Polish border, take your family, take a couple suitcases of money, and you're not coming to America. We've closed you down. We don't like you here. We'll arrest you and execute you if you come here. But go to one of your other little, places that you bought. The British are really good at taking in failed dictators, and settle down there. But you're done. Shut your parliament down while you're at it. We're finished. The Russians are coming in. They're going to hold an election because this is Russia's problem to solve. Okay, wham, we got peace overnight because that's what's going to happen. It's just going to take a couple more months and a lot more people dying. The embarrassment of Europe, the embarrassment of the United States, weakening because the world will now know we're incapable of matching the Russians. But the president can't do that. He has to pretend he's strong. He has to pretend he's in charge. He has to pretend that he's got something on Vladimir Putin. You've heard the hints. I've got something on Vladimir Putin and he knows it. Really? Vladimir Putin must be the dumbest man in the world because it appears he doesn't know it. What's so obvious to you, Donnie? Vlad's just out there pretending as if it doesn't exist. Maybe because it doesn't exist. Maybe this is just another one of your stupid lies. When you hear a man say, I've known Vladimir Putin for a long time and I know him very well. No, you don't. I can guarantee you right now I could just begin to throw questions out there about Vladimir Putin's biography that Trump doesn't know anything. If you don't know his biography, how do you say you know him well? Do you understand the impact of the Battle of Leningrad on Vladimir Putin? Why it impacts him the way it does today? Why he makes certain decisions that he does? Do you understand what it was like for him to be in Dresden when the Berlin Wall fell, stuck in KGB headquarters while the German population turned on him, calling up Moscow, not getting an answer? Did you know that, Mr. President? Did you know that he was a taxi driver for a while in St. Petersburg trying to support his family? This is the president of Russia today, was driving a taxi in St. Petersburg trying to make money to support his family. Do you know what he did in the Russian universities for the KGB in the post-Cold War collapse? How did he become a member of Sobchak's inner circle? Do you know that he was the most incorruptible member of Sobchak's circle, that when people would come and thinking that they would have to hand an envelope of money, Putin asked questions and didn't take the money and didn't allow things to happen that were half-assed, that he was actually a very squared away guy. I'm not saying that Vladimir Putin's perfect. There's certain accusations about things, but I don't want Americans pointing any fingers at Vladimir Putin, because when you join the United States Congress, apparently you get the Nancy Pelosi book on insider trading. So you turn your $175,000 salary into a $2.2 million egg nest after 2 years. And if you stay in another 2 years, you're up to $10 million. You stay in 20 years, you got $200 million. And we call Vladimir Putin corrupt because he may have gotten a dacha as part of a group deal, to house his family. Because he was loyal to Sobchak. That's not corruption. Trump doesn't know anything about Vladimir Putin, doesn't know a damn thing about him, certainly doesn't know how he thinks. He certainly doesn't know how Russia's governed. I'll be honest, neither does the CIA. The CIA has been recruiting people whose sole qualifications have been shouting out that Vladimir Putin is the most evil man on the world, is a dictator, etc. The way you get hired in the CIA to be a national intelligence officer, to work on the National Intelligence College, is to write a PhD thesis that says Vladimir Putin sucks. They have, we used to have academic institutions that encourage Russian era studies and people to become genuine experts about Russia. That's gone. Georgetown doesn't produce a Russian area expert. Georgetown produces a rubber stamp Vladimir Putin hater. Harvard does the same thing. Yale does the same thing. Stanford does the same thing. There are no people who are genuine Russian area experts anymore in government because we haven't produced them. We don't train them anymore. We just train Putin haters. And so there's nobody that can advise this president who comes from the system. And that's a problem, because therefore you can be exploited by people like Keith Kellogg, who just throw out crap, or General Keane, throw things out there. And all you have to do is throw a little ideological McCarthyistic Red Scare thing in there. Putin's an evil autocratic dictator. Well, then we have to believe everything you said, because what you said is true. I mean, it's literally Manchurian Candidate kind of stuff. You're familiar with Manchurian Candidate, the movie, and I forget the name of the guy. Jack Dorsey is the bravest, kindest man that ever walked the face of the earth. Well, none of it's true, but you were programmed to say that. Vladimir Putin is the most evil autocratic dictator in the world, and we must oppose him for none of it's true, but you're programmed to say it. So you just say it over and over and over again until everybody acts on it because that's all they've heard. Instead of somebody raising their hand saying, Vladimir Putin is a noble man who actually saved Russia from the predations of the United States, that the collapse of Russia in the 1990s was brought on solely by the interference of the United States in the internal affairs of Russia. And Vladimir Putin saved Russia, brought them to their feet, taught Russians how to love Russia again. And today, Russia is a nation that stands with pride amongst the other nations, and that Russia could be our friend, should be our friends, wants to be our friend, if only we would let them be our friend. But no, God, as soon as you say it, well, you're Putin's puppet. Well, whatever. I'm just a thinking man who actually knows Russia, took the time to study Russia. But we don't have anybody in government today capable of that kind of thought.
Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Okay.